was the middle of the summer in 2018, and I was a 21-year-old college student home for the break. I was looking forward to a couple of quiet months of relaxing, working, and performing in a local theater production. But instead, my summer turned into a living nightmare that completely robbed me of my sleep. It all started about 2 weeks ago on a completely normal weekday morning around 10 o'clock. I usually go to this small mom-and-pop bagel place right by my house. It was a cozy little spot, and I went there so often that the routine was practically hardwired into my brain. On this particular morning, I walked in, expecting the usual friendly, quiet atmosphere. But when I stepped up to the counter, I noticed a new face. There was a young guy working the register. He looked to be about 24 or 25 years old. As I walked up, he greeted me, but there was something intense about the way he looked at me. He was watching me with this very focused, unwavering gaze that made me feel slightly self-conscious, though I brushed it off as him just trying to be attentive to a customer. I gave him my order, and then I reached into my bag to grab my credit card out of my wallet. As I pulled my wallet out, I accidentally fumbled it, and all of my spare change went flying. Dozens of coins clattered loudly against the hard floor, rolling in every direction. I was absolutely mortified. I immediately bent down to start gathering them up, muttering apologies. But before I could even blink, the employee rushed out from behind the counter. He didn't just walk over, he practically ran to help me. He dropped to his knees right there on the floor and started grabbing the coins. As we were both crouched down, picking up quarters and dimes, I noticed something. He had a bandage on his hand, and it looked like his finger was visibly injured. Seeing him struggle to pick up my dropped coins with a hurt hand made me feel 10 times worse. I quickly insisted that he didn't need to help me, telling him I could get it myself and that he should rest his hand. But he was incredibly adamant. He kept smiling and told me it was no trouble at all, continuing to scoop up the remaining coins. To break the awkward silence, I asked him what had happened to his finger. He sighed, looked down at his hand, and explained that he had dislocated it while playing rugby. We ended up having a very brief, completely harmless conversation about rugby. He told me how long he had been playing, the position he played, and where his team usually practiced. It felt like the kind of friendly, polite small talk you have with a stranger to ease an awkward situation. I paid for my bagels, wished him a nice day, and walked out of the shop, thinking nothing more of it. Later that afternoon, I was sitting on my couch, casually checking my phone, when I noticed a new notification on my Instagram. Someone had started following me. I mindlessly clicked on the notification to see who it was. The second his profile picture loaded, my stomach dropped. It was the guy from the bagel place. I sat there in complete bewilderment, staring at his picture. I had no idea how he could have possibly found me. Logistically speaking, my social media accounts are just my first and last name. If someone really wanted to find me, it wouldn't be impossible. But the problem was, he didn't even know my name. We had never introduced ourselves. I hadn't said my name once during our short interaction. All we talked about was his rugby injury. I started frantically trying to figure out how he did it. Did he look at the name on my credit card when I paid? Or was my name printed on some sort of customer copy of the receipt? The realization that he had actively searched for me using information he shouldn't have been using made me incredibly uneasy. I immediately removed him as a follower, hoping he would get the hint, and tried to put it out of my mind. But about half an hour later, my phone buzzed again. He had followed me a second time, and then a direct message popped up. The message said that he hoped it wasn't weird that he had found my Instagram. He claimed he just couldn't stop thinking about me after our conversation. Now, a wave of genuine unease washed over me. It wasn't just that a stranger was messaging me. I worked in music and theater, so my social media profiles were public for my career. I was used to getting random followers and even occasional messages from strange accounts. I knew how to handle online creeps, but this was different. This guy wasn't a faceless profile on the internet. He was a real person who worked 10 minutes away from my house. He knew what I looked like in person, and he had access to me. The physical proximity made the situation feel incredibly real and dangerous. I decided that the best course of action was to block him entirely, thinking that would be the end of it. But I was completely wrong. My busy schedule started up again the very next day. I worked my normal day job from 7:30 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon, and then I had rehearsals for a theater show from 6 until 10 in the evening. It was a grueling schedule, but I loved it. During my lunch break at work, I pulled out my phone to check my notifications. What I saw made my heart skip a beat. The guy from the bagel shop had created a brand new account. Not only that, but he was spam-liking every single one of my posts. I had over 50 notifications from him alone. He had sent another string of direct messages, complimenting my appearance, asking why I had blocked him, and repeatedly insisting that he only wanted to get to know me. I tried to ignore the knot of anxiety forming in my stomach and went to rehearsal. During our brief 5-minute break in the middle of the rehearsal, I checked my phone again. The situation had escalated dramatically. I had over 100 notifications across multiple social media platforms. He had found my Snapchat, he had found my TikTok, he had gone through my TikTok profile and liked videos going all the way back to 2022. But the worst part was the direct messages. The messages had completely shifted in tone. They were no longer polite. They were becoming demanding and angry. He complained about having to create new accounts just to talk to me. He remarked that I looked very pretty that day. He even mentioned seeing me on Hinge and demanded to know why I hadn't matched with him. That detail about looking pretty that day sent a chill straight down my spine. It meant he had seen me in person that very day. My heart was racing as I stood in the quiet corner of the rehearsal space, trying to process what was happening. I felt completely helpless. Rehearsal finally finished at 10 o'clock that night. I walked out of the stage door, gripping my car keys tightly in my hand. The parking lot was almost entirely dark, save for a few dim streetlights. I had only walked a few steps when I suddenly came to a halt. Something had moved near my car. I stopped and squinted into the darkness. I am nearsighted, so I couldn't see very clearly, but it looked like the figure of a man hovering right around my driver's side window. Panic seized me. I didn't wait to find out who it was. I bolted back inside through the stage door, locked it behind me, and ran to find someone. I ended up finding Finn, the head stage manager. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. Finn was incredibly kind. He calmed me down and listened as I explained everything. He told me to wait in the green room while he went outside to check. I sat there, my heart pounding, waiting for him to return. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was another direct message. The message read, "You look good in blue." I looked down at my clothes. I was wearing a blue shirt. I burst into tears, completely terrified. Finn came back and said he didn't see anyone, but he promised to walk me to my car. As we walked out into the pitch-black parking lot, I was looking around frantically, terrified the man would jump out from behind a trash bin or a tree. When we reached my car, I went to open the door, and then I saw it. There were 2 distinct handprints on my driver's side window. He had been standing right there, leaning against my glass. I realized then how he had found me. I had reposted the cast announcement from the theater on my Instagram story, and he had used the location to track me down. Finn walked me to my car every single night after that to make sure I was safe. I did everything I could to cover my tracks. I stopped posting on my social media until I was safely home. I took alternate routes to work, and I completely stopped going to the bagel shop. But this only made him angrier. He began blowing up my phone with furious messages, demanding to know why I had stopped coming in, why I was no longer parking in my usual spot at work, and warning me that he could easily find me anyway. I began to wonder if I should involve the police, but I worried I was being dramatic. Soon, opening weekend arrived. I stayed backstage after the first 2 shows because I didn't have any family in the audience. But after the Saturday matinee, a friend from the cast came to find me. She told me someone had left flowers for me in the lobby. I walked out hoping it was a surprise from a friend. Instead, it was a bouquet of roses from my stalker. There was a note attached. It said he was disappointed I hadn't come to see him after the show, and remarked that he noticed I had stopped coming for bagels and was no longer parking in my usual spot. It said the roses would look lovely in my bedroom, and added that I didn't need the stage manager to walk me to my car because I had him. That was the absolute last straw. I took the flowers and the note straight to the theater management. We discovered that a newly hired girl at the box office had let him into the building because he told her he was my boyfriend and wanted to surprise me. Even worse, we found out he had purchased tickets for every single night of the show's run. The director called an emergency meeting, banned him from the property, and voided all of his tickets. I haven't seen or heard from him since then, and I am currently in the process of filing a restraining order. I just pray that he finally backs off and leaves me alone. This first experience taught me how easily a routine can be weaponized against you, but it is not the only time a quiet routine has turned into a terrifying ordeal. This brings us to the second story, which takes place in 2018 in Northern Ireland. The narrator of this story lived on a quiet residential street. Directly opposite her house was a row of local shops, and at the very end of this row, right where you turn into the street, was a pharmacy. It was a quiet, familiar neighborhood where nothing major ever really happened. One night, she was driving back to her house at around 2 o'clock in the morning after visiting a friend. It had been a long evening, and she was completely exhausted. Driving on autopilot on the short route home, all she could think about was crawling into her warm bed and going to sleep. As she turned the corner and approached her street, she noticed a figure standing directly outside the pharmacy. In a quiet town, seeing someone out at 2 in the morning isn't completely unusual, so she figured it was just someone walking home from a pub or taking a late-night stroll. But as she drove closer, she realized the person wasn't moving at all. They were standing completely still on the pavement, right in front of the pharmacy doors. They were dressed entirely in black. Even from inside her car, she felt a sudden shift in the air. Something about the person's posture felt wrong. Having lived on this street for most of her life, she had heard occasional stories about people attempting to break into the local shops, and it suddenly occurred to her that she might be witnessing a break-in in progress. She slowed her car down as she prepared to turn into her street, wanting to get a closer look at what the person was doing. As soon as her headlights swept across the front of the pharmacy and illuminated the figure, her heart dropped. The moment the light hit him, the person lifted both of his hands to cover his face. He was wearing thick, black leather gloves. Through her windshield, she watched as the man slowly turned his head, tracking her car as she drove past, all while keeping his gloved hands pressed firmly against his face to hide his identity. Panic began to set in. She pressed down on the gas pedal to speed past him, but in her state of fear, she made a critical mistake. Out of pure instinct, she pulled directly into her own driveway, which was located right across the street from the row of shops. The moment her tires came to a stop, she realized how foolish that was. By pulling into her driveway under the gaze of this stranger, she had just shown him exactly where she lived. She sat frozen in the driver's seat, her mind racing as she tried to figure out what to do. She slowly looked up at her rearview mirror to see if the man was still standing up across the street. When she looked, the pavement in front of the pharmacy was completely empty. For a split second, she felt a wave of relief, thinking he had run away. But then a much more terrifying thought hit her. If he wasn't still standing there, where did he go? It had only been 20 seconds since she drove past him. He couldn't have gone far. She took a deep, shaky breath, opened her car door, and ran faster than she ever had in her life. She reached her front door, fumbled with the keys, pushed inside, and slammed the door shut, locking it securely behind her. She stood in her quiet hallway, trying to calm her racing heart. She took out her phone and texted her friend, explaining what had just happened outside the pharmacy. Her friend texted back quickly, trying to reassure her. Her friend suggested that the man had probably just been scared off by her car headlights, and that she was overthinking the whole thing. It sounded reasonable, and she wanted desperately to believe it. She briefly considered calling the police, but since she hadn't actually witnessed the man commit a crime, she decided against it. She was exhausted, so she decided to just try to forget about it and go to sleep. Her bedroom was located at the front of the house, offering a direct, unobstructed view of the street and the pharmacy across the road. Before getting into bed, she walked over to the window and peeked through the blinds one last time to make sure the street was clear. The road was completely empty and silent. Feeling a bit safer, she closed the blinds, but left her bedroom window slightly cracked open, just as she always did to let in some fresh air. She climbed into bed and fell asleep almost immediately. She didn't know how much time had passed when she suddenly woke up. She was normally a very deep sleeper, and it was incredibly rare for her to wake up in the middle of the night for no reason. She lay perfectly still in the darkness, her eyes wide, listening intently to the quiet house, trying to figure out what had disturbed her sleep. And then she heard it. It was a faint, low sound. Someone was humming. It was a slow, casual melody, like someone humming to pass the time while waiting for something. The sound was incredibly close, and as she listened, she realized with absolute horror that it was coming from directly outside her cracked bedroom window. She glanced at her phone on her nightstand. The screen read 3:30 in the morning. A cold dread washed over her. Her body was completely paralyzed with fear. She tried to tell herself that it was just a random person walking past her house, but she knew deep down that wasn't true. Her window was cracked open, and if whoever was out there wanted to, they could easily push the window open and climb inside. She was completely alone in the house, and if they chose to enter, there would be nothing she could do. She knew she had to call the police, but she was terrified that if she made a sound, the person outside would hear her. She decided the best plan was to quietly slip out of bed, close and lock the window, and then call for help. She began to slide out from under the covers, moving as slowly and silently as possible. Her hands were shaking violently as she reached out toward the window blinds. Just as her fingers touched the plastic, the humming outside stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. Her heart was beating so incredibly fast and loud that she was genuinely terrified the person standing outside would be able to hear it through the open window. With trembling fingers, she slowly parted the blinds to look outside. What she saw in the dim light of the street lamp was the most terrifying thing she had ever seen in her life. The man from the pharmacy was standing right there, directly outside her window. He had never left. He had hidden in the shadows when she pulled into her driveway, watched her turn on her bedroom light, and realized exactly which room was hers. He was standing on her property, looking straight at her. Once again, his black leather-gloved hands were covering his face. But this time he had spread his fingers slightly apart, creating a small gap. Through that gap, one of his eyes was staring directly into hers. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching her through his fingers. And then slowly, she saw the corner of his mouth curl up into a wide, creepy smile beneath his gloved hands. She let out a terrified scream, pushed herself away from the window, and grabbed her phone. She dialed 999, crying so hard that the emergency operator could barely understand her. She had never felt such a profound sense of relief as when the flashing red and blue lights of the police cars finally illuminated her bedroom walls. The officers arrived quickly and began searching the property, checking the gardens, the side alleys, and the surrounding streets. But the man was already gone. However, the police did find something else. The glass door of the pharmacy across the street had been completely smashed. The only reason the intruder hadn't managed to get inside was because the heavy security metal shutter was down behind the glass. Realizing he couldn't get in, he had given up on the robbery. The police suggested that the man had noticed her slowing down and watching him, and he may have followed her to her house to intimidate her and prevent her from calling the police about the attempted break-in. She still lives in that same house today. She has never seen the man again, but every single time she drives past that pharmacy late at night, she looks at the exact spot where he stood, and a chill runs down her spine. While some threats come from strangers we spot in the dark, other threats can come from the people who are supposed to keep us safe, people who have access to our most private spaces. This brings us to our third and final story, which highlights just how vulnerable we can be in our own homes. Prior to this experience, a 19-year-old server was never really afraid of living alone. She was eager to gain some independence and escape a difficult living situation with her former roommates. She worked full-time hours at a popular chain restaurant not far from her hometown, making decent money for someone her age. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to afford a place of her own. Fortunately, she found an apartment complex just down the road from her job that seemed clean, safe, and highly affordable. While lower-priced apartments sometimes came with noisy or unpredictable neighbors, everything seemed perfectly fine and secure during the first few months of her lease. She kept a very simple, predictable routine. She went to work, came home, and stayed inside. The only times she really left her apartment outside of her work shifts were to run quick errands within the complex, like walking to the leasing office to check her mailbox or taking her trash bags down to the dumpsters supplied by the landlord. Both of these tasks took only a minute or two, as the dumpsters and the office were less than half a mile from her front door. After several months of quiet, peaceful living, strange things began to happen in her apartment. They were small, subtle things that she couldn't quite explain. One afternoon, she came home from a long shift at work and immediately felt a strange sensation as she stepped through the front door. It wasn't the feeling of being watched, but rather the heavy intuition that someone had been inside her home while she was away. The atmosphere felt different. Her apartment was on the second floor, meaning she had to walk up a flight of stairs before the space opened up into the living room and the kitchen. As she reached the top of the stairs and looked toward the living room, her heart stopped. There, clearly visible on the light-colored carpet, were several very large, muddy footprints. They were clearly made by a man's shoe, and they led straight from the entrance area into her kitchen. Trying to stay calm, she walked into the kitchen to see if anyone was hiding there. The room was empty, but there were more muddy footprints on the linoleum floor. She quickly searched the rest of the apartment, checking the closets and under her bed, but found no one. She immediately checked her valuables, but to her surprise, nothing was missing. Her cash, her electronics, and her jewelry were all exactly where she had left them. This almost made the situation more confusing and unsettling than if she had actually been robbed. She called the leasing office to ask if any maintenance workers had been scheduled to enter her apartment that day. The management company wasn't known for being highly professional, and she thought perhaps they had simply forgotten to notify her about a routine inspection or repair. However, the person on the phone confirmed her worst fears. No maintenance workers had been authorized to enter her home that day. Feeling anxious, she called a close friend who lived just a few streets away in the same apartment complex. She explained everything she had found, but her friend brushed it off. He told her she was likely being paranoid and suggested that she had probably walked through the apartment with muddy shoes herself and simply forgotten about it. Knowing she would never wear muddy boots on her clean carpet, she felt frustrated but decided to let it go. She made sure to double-check that all her doors and windows were locked before she left for work the next day. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. In fact, they grew even more bizarre. A few days later, she came home to find that a brand new jug of water she kept stored in her refrigerator had been taken out, opened, and left sitting on the kitchen counter, half empty. Another day, she returned to find that her thermostat had been cranked up to the highest possible setting, something she knew she would never do because she was responsible for paying her own heating bill. Each time she called her friend to report these findings. Each time her friend told her she was being forgetful. Without any physical proof of a break-in, she began to wonder if she really was losing her mind. But then came a hot summer night that changed everything. She arrived home from a late shift at her restaurant at around 11 o'clock. The apartment complex was pitch black. She walked from her car to her second-story entrance with her keys already in her hand. But as she reached for the doorknob, she froze. The door was already cracked open. It wasn't wide open, but it was unlatched and resting slightly away from the frame. She knew for a fact that she had locked it before leaving for work. She had recently adopted a young kitten who was not allowed outside, and her immediate fear was that the kitten had escaped or been hurt. Despite knowing she should call the police instead of entering, she pushed the door open and stepped inside to search for her pet. Thankfully, the kitten was safe inside. But the realization that someone had been in her home again made her furious. She decided she needed to get concrete proof that she wasn't crazy. She came up with a simple test. Every time she left her apartment, even if it was just for a few minutes, she would place a small piece of clear tape across the bottom seam of her front door. If the tape was broken or peeled away when she returned, it meant the door had been opened. To her horror, the tape was broken or missing almost every single time she left. It didn't matter if she was gone for an 8-hour shift at work or just a 2-minute trip to throw away her trash. The tape was always disturbed. This meant that whoever was doing this was not just entering her apartment randomly. They were actively watching her. They knew her exact schedule, and they knew precisely when she stepped out, even for the briefest moments. She began finding her door completely wide open when she returned home from work. The psychological toll was immense. She felt completely unsafe in her own home, constantly looking over her shoulder. She began filing regular police reports, but the officers told her there was little they could do without a suspect or physical evidence of forced entry or theft. She tried to get out of her lease early, but the leasing office refused to cooperate, leaving her stuck in the apartment. She felt trapped and completely helpless. Then, one afternoon on her day off, she noticed that her gaming console and several other valuable electronics were missing from her television stand. For the first time, she felt a strange mix of anger and relief. This was the tangible proof she needed. No one could claim she was being paranoid anymore. She called the police and her friend immediately. The police came and took a formal report of the theft, and her friend was absolutely stunned and deeply apologetic for doubting her. Her friend began keeping a close eye on her apartment, even lending her his large dog to keep her company and act as a deterrent while she was away at work. Fortunately, no other incidents occurred during the final months of her lease, and she moved out the moment it ended, vowing never to return to that complex. 4 years passed. She met her spouse, and the couple began looking for an affordable place to live to save money. Despite her past experiences, they decided to rent an apartment in her old complex, reasoning that since they were living together and years had passed, things would be different. For a while, everything was perfectly normal, but one afternoon, as she was carrying groceries from her car to her new apartment, she was stopped by one of the complex's maintenance workers. The man looked at her, called her by her actual name, and pointed toward her old apartment building, asking if she used to live over there. She was instantly uncomfortable. She had never met this man, and she couldn't understand how he knew her name or where she used to live. She defensively told him no, and asked how he had that information. The worker explained that the woman in the leasing office had mentioned it to him. Sensing her distress and suspicion, the maintenance worker quickly offered an explanation that answered the questions she had been asking herself for years. He told her that a former maintenance worker who had worked at the complex during her first lease had recently been fired and arrested. He had been caught using his master keys to break into the apartments of single women throughout the complex. The worker told her he was certain she had been one of his victims. The pieces of the puzzle suddenly fell into place. The perpetrator had a master key, which was why there was never any sign of forced entry. But the most terrifying detail was where he had lived. The arrested maintenance worker had lived in the apartment directly across the street from her old unit. Their front doors had faced each other, separated by a distance of no more than 50 feet. Because he lived right there, he could watch her every move through his window. He knew exactly when she left to throw away the trash, when she walked to the mailboxes, and when she left for her shifts. He could step out of his door, unlock her apartment, spend time inside, and walk back to his own home in a matter of seconds. It was a sobering realization that left her shaken, but also deeply relieved to finally know the truth. It was a reminder to always trust your instincts, because sometimes the danger is closer than you could ever imagine. This complex was supposed to be a safe place for a young woman to start her independent life, but instead, it turned out to be a panopticon where her privacy was completely stripped away by someone who was trusted with the keys to the entire building. The psychological scars of knowing that a stranger sat in her living room, drank her water, adjusted her heater, and watched her through his window for months, without her knowledge, are something she still carries to this day. Even now, years later, she still finds herself checking the locks multiple times a night, setting up hidden cameras, and feeling a sudden jolt of panic whenever she hears a noise outside her front door. It is a level of hypervigilance that never truly goes away once your personal sanctuary has been violated so deeply. We like to think that our homes are our castles, that once we close the door and turn the lock, the rest of the world cannot touch us. But the truth is, the locks are only as good as the people who hold the keys. And sometimes, the very person who is supposed to maintain your building is the one who is secretly waiting in the shadows for you to step outside, even if only for a brief moment. So, if you ever feel that strange, unexplainable sensation that the energy in your home has shifted, or if you notice small, inexplicable changes in your environment, do not let anyone convince you that you are just being paranoid or forgetful. Your mind has a powerful way of picking up on subtle dangers that your conscious thoughts might try to dismiss. It is always better to double check, to set up that camera, to use the tape on the door, and to trust your gut. Because in the end, your intuition is your most valuable line of defense against the predators who walk among us in broad daylight, wearing the uniforms of people we are supposed to trust. These 3 stories show us that whether it is an obsessive stranger from a local shop who tracks your digital footprint to find your physical location, a masked figure waiting in the dead of night outside a quiet pharmacy who decides to follow you home and peer through your window with a terrifying smile, or a neighbor with a master key who monitors your daily routines to slip inside your apartment, the second you walk